Hello there, Michelle Short here for My Favourite Things. Today I have a winter tag to share with you using the most adorable snowman. So let's get started. This is the JB Snow Happy set and I've stamped that adorable snowman onto some white cardstock using black ink. I'm then going to create a base for him to be in. So I'm taking the Fanciful Frames Stacks Die-namics and I'm taking, I guess, one of the middle size of the layers, and I'm going to cut that from some white cardstock. I am creating a tag today from these shapes, but these shapes work really nicely on a card as well. So I'm holding that die down with some low tack tape, and then I can run that through my die cutting machine. I do want to make sure that I've got enough space on this panel of cardstock for two of these shapes, because I want to use one for the front of the tag and then one for the back. So running that through my die cutting machine, and then I can just pop that out and then I can die cut the second one. I then want to create a scene for the snowman to be in, so I'm taking the Warm Winter Hugs set and I'm taking this image here, kind of like a snowbank with some trees, and I'm going to stamp that onto this panel. So I've just taken some removable tape so that I can adhere that down temporarily into my MISTI, and then I can bring in this snowbank image. I'm also going to bring in the stamp set here, so like the packaging, so that I can see how far down I need this image to be for where I want to have the snowman end up. So just figuring out the placement there. Once I'm happy, I can close the MISTI door to pick up that stamp, and then I can stamp that down onto the panel using black ink. And then without re-inking the image, I'm going to bring in some masking paper and I'm going to stamp that onto the masking paper. I don't like to re-ink it just so that I don't have too much ink on that masking paper. It does take a little while to dry. I'm then taking some scissors and I'm going to cut around the top part of this image. When I cut masks, I do like to try and cut on the line rather than sort of outside of the line. That just helps to prevent any kind of halo or anything like that from the ink blending that I'm going to add on top. I can remove the backing off of that masking paper and then I can place that down onto the image. So just trying to line that up as best as possible. That's just going to protect the bottom part while I add some ink blending onto the top part. So I'm taking picked raspberry distress ink. I'm adding some of that onto a blending brush, and then I can blend that onto the top part of this panel. And I thought it'd be quite nice to create a pink sky today. I do almost always gravitate towards purple skies or aqua skies, but I think it's quite nice to change it up a little bit and add a pink sky. And it's also going to work really nicely with the colours that I use on the snowman as well. So just adding some layers of this ink here. I do like to work in light layers and build them up as I go. I'm trying to focus most of the darker colour towards the bottom where the kind of horizon meets the snow, and then I'm going to kind of try and blend it up a little bit lighter towards the top of the panel. I'm then going to go in with Seedless Preserves Distress ink, which is just a little bit darker, more of a purple toned pink, and I can add that towards the bottom here. I am getting not a great smooth blend. I am finding it a little bit difficult here. I think the ink is a little bit dry, so I'm just taking my time here to go in layers, and then I can bring in that picked raspberry again and just try and blend those two colours together. And then once I'm happy with the blend, I can remove that masking paper, and I've got that lovely crisp white snow there at the bottom. I'm then going to colour my images with Copic markers. And like I say, I want to coordinate the background with the image, or the snowman in this case. So I'm going to colour parts of the snowman with some pink shades. So the hat, the scarf, and also his mittens. So I'm starting off with my darkest shade here, which is RV69. And I'm mapping out where I think the darkest areas will be. I'm focusing most of the darker colour towards the right hand side, but I do want some on the left hand side as well, because these images are round rounded, so you would get shadows on either side. I can then blend that out with the RV66, so going over some of the area where I did with the darker shade and then bringing that colour out towards the sort of middle of these images here. I can then go in with the RV55, excuse me, and add in that colour here. And for the areas on the scarf, I am filling in those areas completely with this colour because I want the stripes on the scarf to be quite a lot lighter. So now I can go in with RV52, fill in the rest of those areas on the hat and the mittens, and then those stripes on the scarf. Then for the fluffy white areas on the hat, I do want to add some shadow onto those. So I'm bringing in some cool grey colours, starting off with C3, and I'm just dotting that in mainly on the right hand side, and then adding in some C1 and then C0. And that's just going to make it look a little bit fluffy and add some texture onto it. And then for the snow itself, I'm bringing in some aquatones. So I'm starting off with BG13. Now this is going to look really dark as I'm colouring in the snowman here. But once I add it onto the background, it's going to really kind of dull it out a little bit. So it's not going to look so vibrant. At the moment, it can kind of look a little bit like I'm colouring in the snow completely aqua. But I do want to make sure that I add a lot of shading onto this image. Like I say, once I add it onto the background, it's going to look a lot lighter, and also I don't want it to look too flat. So I used the BG13, BG11, BG10, and then I'm blending that out with the colourless blender, and that's just going to fade that lightest colour to the colour of the cardstock. I can then go in with some darker greys for the buttons, so I used C8 and C10. And then for the carrot nose, I'm using YR16, YR12, and then I didn't think that that was quite dark enough, so I'm bringing in YR18 just on the right hand side. Then for the trees for the background, I'm starting off by adding in a layer of YG17. Again, focusing most of the colour towards the right hand side and the bottom, and then I can bring in my darkest shade, which is G29. This is quite a lot darker than the YG17, so I do like to add that base of the YG17 first, then blend that back out with the YG17, the YG23, and then finish off with the YG01. And then for the snow, I'm using the same colours that I did for the snowman. So I'm starting off with BG13, adding some of that darker colour towards the bottom of the trees, so it kind of looks like they're sort of stuck in the snow. And then also on that little snowbank there on the left hand side, I blended that out with the BG11, followed that with the BG10, and then the colourless blender. I do want to add a little bit more colour onto this, but I want to cut out my snowman first. So I'm taking the coordinating snow happy Die-namics. I can place that over the image, hold that down with some low tack tape, and run that through my die cutting machine. I can then use the snowman to map out where I want the shadow to be below him. So I'm just adding some small little dabs here of the colour. I don't want to accidentally get any on him, so I was just being quite careful there. And then I can fill in some of that area here as a shadow below him. So I'm adding in the same colours as I did before, the BG13, the BG11, blending that out with the BG10, followed by the colourless blender. And then I did want to add in some little dots. I thought that this would add kind of to the texture of the snow, make it look a little bit fluffy. I then want to make this shape into a tag. So I'm taking the whole reinforcer piece from the Do It All gift tag Die-namics set. I've cut that twice from some black licorice cardstock, and I'm just going to place this onto the shape here towards the top. And I'm just going to eyeball it to see where I think the centre would be, and then I can just draw a little pencil mark there. I'm then taking that other shape that I die cut from the white cardstock, adding some tape runner adhesive onto the back of that, and then I can sandwich those two pieces back to back. That's going to give some stability to the tag, but also make it so that it's neat and tidy on the back as well. I've then cut a hole using a crocodile, and that's going to create the tag for me. So then I can add those hole reinforcer pieces over the top just to neaten that up. And now it looks like it's always meant to be a tag. I'm then adding some twine through the hole there, securing that in place at the front, and then I can tie that in a bow. And I like to use black twine here. I think it just brings in the stamped lines on the images a little bit more and just makes everything look a little bit cohesive. So just fiddling with that bow for a little while. Once I'm happy with the size of that, I can cut those tails down with some scissors. I've then added some foam tape onto the back of the snowman, or the snow woman, or the snow person, however you want it to be. And then I can remove the backings off of that foam tape and then pop him down. Just using some tweezers here so that I can hover him in place before I really press him down onto the tag. I then wanted to add some snow and stars in the sky, so I'm using a 0.8 white gel pen. So starting off by adding in a few stars. And then I can bring in some snow as well. So I'm trying to randomize the snow as best as possible. It's always quite difficult when you want things to look random, but I'm adding in some of the pieces a little bit bigger and some of them a little bit smaller. I then want to make sure that I add snow onto his hat and also the scarf as well, and also onto the trees. That's going to make it look like he's in part of the scene rather than in front of the scene. So just adding a few dots of the snow there as well. I can then add some clear glaze pen onto his buttons and also his nose. And then to finish off, I'm adding some white Blizzard Glitter Nouveau drops onto the fluffy areas on the hat. And I'm just kind of dabbing this on so that it adds to that texture of it. And that's just going to add a little bit of sparkle onto the tag. I decided to leave the tag as is and not add any sentiment, but I could stamp a sentiment onto the back if I wanted to. But just in case I add this onto a card, it's quite nice to leave the sentiment off. And also I think it would work quite nice as a holiday tag, but also a general winter tag as well. Links to the products that I used will be listed in the description bar here on YouTube. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful day.